So currently it is the final stretch of the beta. It ends at about 8 hours from when recording this video. And I figured because I have maxed all the classes, as you can see right to the left of me, and I have experimented with a ton of builds and I've played this game for a ton of time, I'd give you all my full review of the beta. But first, the sponsor of today's video. So today's sponsor is King Arthur Legends Rise. This game was previously known as Project Knights and was recently revealed at this year's GDC. King Arthur Legends Rise is a really interesting RPG that actually is based in Arthurian legend, one of my favorite mythos. In the game, you can build squads of various fantasy classes such as knights, mages, rogues, or even collect characters like Arthur, Kay, and Hector. There are also a variety of weapons known as relics for you to perfect in order to beat the waves of enemies that you will be battling. The ultimate goal is to rebuild the Kingdom of Camelot, and you could do this on mobile or PC. And I have to add that this game looks absolutely amazing, especially the close-up battle animations when you use a skill or even the character design itself. If you enjoy Arthurian mythos as much as I do, you do not want to miss this. Be sure to click the link in the description down below, wishlist this game on Steam to stay up to date. There will also be an open beta test starting on March 27th, available on Google Play in select regions. Be sure to check it out early. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in game. First thing is that we only got the game up to level 25, and we only got the game up to Act 1. There could be potentially a ton of diversity, and according to their claims by Rod Ferguson, we are going to get a ton of diversity. There's a ton of balanced things that really we haven't gotten our hands on, and of course any experience that we've had is relatively low level without including, of course, max level, a ton of legendaries, the Paragon system, and all the different things that are supposed to be in the game later on. Which means that although it is extremely early game, we are limited on a lot of things. We are going to get a baseline idea of kind of the core mechanics of the game, because a lot of the core mechanics will stay the same. The only thing that we haven't really experienced is class balancing, endgame, as well as what the end game is going to look like. Everything else I think is going to stay relatively the same. Now with that out of the way, let's dive into all the topics that I want to talk about. I will leave timestamps in the description down below if you want to skip to a specific part. With that being said, let's dive into our first topic, which is I had fun. And I think that's the first thing I want to start with, because a lot of people dive into the critique and all the different nuance of the game. First and foremost, the idea of the game, it is a casual ARPG slash MMO. What that means is if you are someone who can only log in for a couple hours, or just enjoys the casual experience of an ARPG, this game will be amazingly fun for you. On top of that, even if you are someone who's more hardcore, experiencing all the skills, the different classes, and the systems in this game is a pretty fun experience. And over the course of 100 hours, there wasn't really a time that I wanted to stop playing. It was more of just I wanted to really dive into the game and I couldn't, which is so unfortunate because we're gonna have to wait another 3 months. So I had fun, and I think that's super underrated for so many people. There's so many videos diving straight into the critique, and I just want to talk about how much fun I had over these past 2 weekends. With that being said, let's talk about the open world first. Now, the open world has a few mechanics to it. First off, we have the renown system. Now, part of the renown system is a few of the instance content, for example, dungeons. But for the open world part, we have things like strongholds, we have open world events, we have the world boss system, and we also have the altars of Lilith and the strongholds. Now, I actually find strongholds to be an extremely fun part of the game. What are strongholds? Well, strongholds are essentially towns, and I'll teleport to one right now, that are corrupted, and you're going to have to clean them out. And at the end of the day, it will clear the entire monster area and replace it with a town, with a waypoint, which is actually a really, really cool experience. It will basically kind of feel like a living, changing world. And that's exactly what happened to this town over here. On top of that, all of these side quests, these things are pretty typical of your MMOs, right? Go to this place, kill monsters, collect loot, do this dungeon. They're all very, very stereotypical. They're not particularly interesting, to be honest, but they are kind of nice in this game because you can kind of pick them up and then do your open world exploration at the same time that you're completing these side quests, which allow you to get the renown. Now we touch on the renown real quick here because it does apply to all the areas that we're exploring, the strongholds and the side quests. The renown is basically a account wide, assuming you're playing on softcore, then it's going to apply to all softcore characters. If you're on hardcore, it will apply to all hardcore characters, but it will not cross over. But the renown system is going to get you extra skill points, extra like account upgrades like potion charges and things like that, or even later on when we get to the higher difficulties, we're going to get the paragon points and things like that, which is really, really interesting, and it makes world exploration really, really fun to go for. The last thing, and the most important thing, is the events. Now, this is where things get, in my opinion, I have quite a few critiques of these. The first thing is that it is auto scaled to the players around you. So if I decide to leave and explore the open world, I am forced into an instance mode. There is no single player mode. Now, I actually don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. The problem lies in kind of how the events are devised. There's two real big issues with the events, and that is, one, you do not need to participate in them to get rewards. What does that mean? Well, if I was a player who wanted to just sit back at AFK next to an event spawn, I could do that. And if someone comes by, I mean, look at this. There is 3 people here, all necros, and I don't know if they're AFK. It looks like, you know, they're fighting it. But if I just want to sit back and relax, I would get rewards for this boss. And I'm actually going to do it just so you guys see it. At the same time, I'm actually making this boss harder for the players in the area, which is really unfortunate. But you can see here, I'm gonna get the loot anyways for not doing a single thing, which is really just a bad design. You don't require participation and you make the game harder for people. This needs to change. Either you need to tag enemies at the minimum, which is pretty common in MMOs in general, where you have to tag monsters to get credit, or just remove the fact that people auto scale at the minimum so that, you know, it doesn't make it harder for the people that are actually participating. I think this honestly needs a big rework. I personally think that you need to be able to tag the enemy, or more importantly, actually do some sort of contribution and get tiered rewards based on how much you contribute. Not that if you do, like, let's say minimum 10% of the boss's HP, nothing like that, but as long as you are in combat at a reasonable amount and actually participating, then you get more rewards, and everyone kind of gets that max reward cap. I think that's something like that needs to happen, because that is just pretty bad design in my opinion. The second thing is that if you're in an event area and you teleport back to town and then teleport back to your portal, you can actually reset the event. This is really, really unfortunate as well, because it actually abuses a lot of world boss mechanics where you can get insane loot. So people can teleport away, teleport back, and then join in and again leech the fight, just like I was talking about earlier, of people who have been fighting the boss for, you know, I don't know, 10 minutes, and then you just pick up the last part of the loot and you just cash in. You don't even have to fight it. You can just cash in, teleport back to the town and go back in, and then reset the events. And then for smaller events, it just resets it and then you have to participate in it again. And I think this probably needs to change. Either stay in the same instance when you teleport back to town or something, because getting like infinite loot is honestly probably not a good thing for the game, because you can get absurd amounts of loot, since world bosses are typically the best loot in the open world. I can't compare to the end-game nightmare dungeons and things like that, but in terms of open world bosses are the #1 thing you're going to want to do. So those are my 2 critiques of the open world. Other than that, it's honestly been a pretty fun experience, and I do want to touch on dynamic leveling, but I do think it deserves its own subject in this video because I want to talk about it a lot more, and we'll go over that a little bit later on. The second thing I want to talk about is dungeons. So there's actually been a ton of critiques about the dungeons. I will say in general, this is going to be your standard kill, grab things, place on pedestals, kill this monster to get past this gate, they're not particularly exciting. And are they repetitive? Absolutely. They are some of the most repetitive content in the game. For me, however, that didn't really matter. For those of you that play Diablo 3 or even Diablo 2, you might have said, oh, well, maybe the layouts are a little bit different. But at the end of the day, in those games, I literally load it up, I run a Greater Rift, and I go ahead and clear the Greater Rift by killing all the monsters, and then I'm done. After I kill the monsters, I'm done. That's it. That's the end of the Greater Rift. There's no real mechanics, there's no real interesting thing to look at. And so for me, the repetitiveness of the dungeons don't really matter a whole lot. However, there are a few problems with the dungeons that I think are annoying and could definitely drive players away. And although I don't mind very much, I do think that at the end of the day, it's not actually good game design, and that's, in my opinion, more important than whatever someone else thinks. And what I mean by this is there is a couple of dungeon types, for specifically one dungeon type that forces you to kill all monsters in the dungeon. This is a horrible dungeon to do because you will load into a dungeon and you might miss a singular bat at the beginning or a skeleton or something, and you're gonna run through the whole dungeon and then you have to backtrack the entire dungeon back to the start to kill that singular bat, and then you're gonna have to run all the way back to the top of the dungeon or wherever to continue onwards, and that's just annoying, right? Give us so that we have to kill most, or like a progress bar so that we have to, you know, go ahead and finish, and then once we get that progress bar done, then we get to the boss fight. Don't make us kill every single monster in the dungeon. And the second thing is, in general, there is a lot of downtime. Now again, I don't particularly mind myself because, well, there's a lot of downtime in a lot of different games that, you know, are repeating content. However, it is certainly a break from the gameplay, and I think that the gameplay in of itself is actually some of the best parts of Diablo 4. So I think anytime you can encourage gameplay, it's a good thing, right? So forcing us to, you know, walk away from monsters and not participate in the actual game is a bad thing. So I think that a lot of times when you have to backtrack for certain things for the dungeons, it's not a good thing. As for the same thing over and over again, which means, like, as you see as I'm doing this dungeon right now, we have to kill a monster, bring a key over to a certain part, open the door, and then kill the boss. I don't think that matters a whole lot. Yes, you could be more exciting. Yes, it could be more in-depth. But at the end of the day, we're going to be running these over and over and over again. And so, yes, if you were to make it super in-depth, well, it doesn't really matter, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the same old every single time anyways. I think the thing that really matters is the annoying parts of the dungeon, and to make it more fun. That is way more important to me. Now, since we've talked about the dungeons here, I want to talk about the next part, which is itemization in this game. Now, itemization really, I think, is honestly quite good, and as far as we've seen, a big step up from games like Diablo 3. Now, it might not be as complicated or as in-depth or as, you know, I guess you could say sophisticated as some other games out there like Diablo 2 or Path of Exile, although I do think they do have in this game a complicated system that does require some learning. I think that's a good thing for this game. Me personally, I enjoy it because it allows me to learn all the builds a little bit quicker, as well as able to experience and put together a pretty amazing build overall. Now, the way it works is essentially rare items have a chance to roll an additional substat comparatively to legendary items, because one of the slots in the legendary items is going to be taken up by this aspect at the bottom, as you see here. Now, this aspect can actually be extracted from legendary items and applied to other items, including other legendaries, other rares, and allowing you to essentially imprint an aspect onto a weapon. Now, depending on where you place it or what aspect it is, it'll have to go on certain slots, or it will get stronger or weaker, depending on, again, what it is. I think this is a pretty cool idea. On top of that, we have a lot of interesting base stats, or I guess you'd say substats, like for example, ultimate skill damage or basic skill damage. You have things like obviously your core stats according to each of your characters. You have things like crit strike, all this good stuff. All of these things are interesting, and in my opinion, the most interesting thing is increasing the rank of your abilities, allowing you to change up your build, because you can go ahead and apply some ranks to new ability just to run on your bar, or just massively increase the damage on one of your skills. I think the simplicity of it, which is go for your skill, upgrade that, get big damage, get your aspects that you want. I think at the end of the day, if you're surface level, want to engage in the game as a casual player, it's really interesting. And then for min-maxing, there actually is a lot of options there. And so I think it's actually pretty cool, and I don't mind it at all. The next thing I want to talk about is the skill tree. Now, this is something that is hotly debated and honestly called out as simplistic, not innovative, and boring. This is what I've heard. First off, I want to mention the skill tree is something that we have not really dove into. A, because we have not reached the higher levels, therefore we have to be very selective with how we build out our skills. And B, the Paragon levels, which is unlocked at 50, have not been unlocked, and so we really don't know how complicated it truly gets. However, in terms of the base skill tree, I really like the simplicity of it. I think that that's a really advantageous thing for a lot of players. One of the best things about it is that there seems to be very easy combos to understand and to pair together. At the same time, when you start to involve legendary aspects and the itemization, it gets a lot more complicated due to how all these things interact, and you potentially changing out some of your passives for their passives because you don't need them anymore because, you know, your legendary item fixes that for you. I think this has a lot of opportunity to be min-maxed with the legendary aspects as we move forward, and yet as a casual enjoyer, if you are one, you can jump into this and really understand most of the skill tree without too much of like a build guide. Whereas if you start up Path of Exile and you load in and you look at the skill tree, I feel like you see that and you're like, I honestly don't know really where to start. I can kind of go in one direction and it'd be okay. But it's not like this game where you can just load it up. Oh, I have a storm skill. Maybe I should pair that with the other storm skill. Or I have a werewolf skill, maybe I pair that with the other werewolf skill. You know, that type of idea, the classification of each skill, I think it's very, very intuitive and easy to understand, which is actually a really, really good thing for the game. After that, I want to talk about classes. Now, this is again another hotly debated topic. Now, I have maxed every class. I have gone in depth in trying to craft a build, but albeit surface level. And what I mean by that is I've tried so many different builds. However, I've not min-maxed any of the builds realistically. The reason for this is at level 25, we're not even going to be able to be close to min-maxing builds. 1, 2, I wanted to experience it all. And 3, I wanted to see if every class really has an option. And I will have to say, every class has an option pretty early on into the game. Even the class that people claim as Druid is the weakest, I don't even necessarily agree with. You guys can see my video on the Druid build that I came up with the other day, and it was killing bosses in the same time, if not faster, than the Sorcerer, Rogue, and Necromancer. Why? Well, because we got some good legendary items, 1 or 2 of them that we got the proper aspect for, just like the other classes, and we built a build around them. And even before then, we were still doing good damage because we knew how to allocate our skill points. Now, does that mean that all classes are created equal? And I'm just being, you know, I guess you could say a contrarian. No, this is not true. Not every class is created equal. Some classes require A, more effort, B, more skill, C, they're harder in the early game, especially classes like Sorcerer and Necromancer really shine to be pretty lazy in the beginning of the game and just one-shot everything. And so while I do think every class will have a build later on and be totally fine, I think class balance really can't be discussed until we get to the end game. I do have the opinion that every class should have an easy time leveling. And I don't think that's necessarily the case for specifically the Druid and the Barbarian a little bit, and that has to do with the melee imbalance. As for the classes, which I want to talk about that in just a bit, as for the classes themselves, I think they're very, very fun. The one thing I would say as a big critique of the classes, as well as the skill tree as kind of a combo, is that some of the skills and the builds that for each class are very, I guess you could say, bad. Like some of the skills don't make sense. Some of the builds don't really fit, even though they're synergistic. The numbers need to be tuned, and so each class kind of has like 1 to 3 builds right now. Perhaps there's going to be more because of the legendary aspects again, so this could be different later on. But even just the skills themselves, some of them feel really, really weak, and they don't feel like you could be using them for a lot of value. And so I think that kind of needs to be looked at. Now, as I was saying earlier about melee imbalanced, there is a huge issue in this game, and I want to see if I can go ahead and pull up a clip for you guys, because this clip will perfectly show exactly what I mean. So I'm going to pull up the world boss fight here, and I was doing this world boss on the rogue, I believe, and you'll see here near the end of the fight, you'll see these little green pools show up everywhere. Now, with these green pools, they actually just stick around, and sometimes the boss will find itself in a pool. Look at here, this is a perfect example. Right there, you can notice the boss is just chilling in a green pool, okay? And in order to avoid the abilities, you typically need to be behind this boss. And so what ends up happening is you'll see some wizards off to the side, or necromancers, or whoever, and they can drop something and walk away and shoot from a screen away. And then for your melee classes, in this case I was playing a rogue, a melee rogue, have to be on top of the boss to do damage. Specifically, the druid tends to be, and the barbarian tends to be. And if you're a melee rogue, the melee rogue. And so what this means is you cannot do anything. And this, I think, is a pretty big thing with the game. It doesn't have anything to do with the class being weak necessarily. I think that is a poor, I guess you could say, conclusion to why you had a bad experience. The reason why we're having bad experiences on things like the druid or the barbarian, or why it's super common to have a bad experience, is because it doesn't feel like you can even play the game sometimes, because the pools just block you from interacting at all. Or there might be some sort of laser field, or there's some storyline bosses which shoot out orbs, and if you hit the lasers or you hit the barriers, you're going to get basically detonated and die. If you're a sorcerer, you could see it coming and dodge it. If you're a melee character, it can just explode on your face right there. These are big problems and should definitely be looked at, because what ends up happening is you find people saying, oh, Barb is trash, Druid is trash, they're not good, they have no damage, they struggle. And although some of those critiques are true, it's mainly because it's harder to play, because you have to get in range. And two, there's so many times where you can't even play the game because you cannot actually get close, otherwise you will die. So I think this is honestly probably my biggest critique of the game, is that the melee needs to be looked at. Not in terms of stats or giving them a bunch of stats, I guess that's one way to solve it, but in terms of how the fight mechanics play out for a lot of bosses. I doubt they're going to change this, but it would be lovely to see. Now we move on to another hotly debated topic, which is dynamic leveling. As I mentioned, I wanted to cover this a little bit more in depth. So what is the dynamic leveling in this game? So basically you start at whatever level you are. In this case, I'm level 25. And there are areas around the map that actually have a specific level. For example, some of the strongholds like Nostrava starts at level 19. Core Dragon starts at level 25. And if you enter these zones, you will not be skilled at all, and these monsters will be level 25, and you'll be whatever level you are, unless you're higher than it. And so what this does is, if you're lower level than the monsters, you will get bonus XP. If you're higher level than the monsters and they have a base level, then you'll get less XP, although that almost never happens. Every other part of the world, and even those areas, if you're higher level than the monsters in those areas, the monsters will scale to your level. Now, the problem with this is that each monster level they basically get anywhere from like, I don't know, 10 to 15% HP and defensive stats. Whereas you, in your skills, you can only get around 8 to 9% of your damaging ability, or potentially 10% increase in your damage. So if you're just relying on your skill points, you will end up being weaker. At the same time, unless you get a legendary item, you will be weaker. Legendary items, however, when you do get them, you'll be massively stronger, assuming they correspond to your build. But because it's a shared experience, what ends up happening is if you're in a level, let's say 3 area, and you find these monsters and you start fighting them, and then you see a level 3 pass you by, even though you're a higher level, you will generally be weaker than them unless you have a build that you generally have sorted out. This kind of makes people feel bad, and it generally gives the impression that you're getting weaker as you level up. However, there's a huge plus side to dynamic leveling, and that is that you can always play with your friends. And as for a casual experience with cross-platform, this is an amazing thing and is a huge advantage. And despite that disadvantage of you feeling like you're getting weaker, I think that dynamic leveling is 100% an amazing feature in this game and would not ever remove it from the game. However, there is something that you can do to change how the negatives affect you. And that is, what you do is you create level caps in each of the zones. Let's say I'm in this level 25 area, and the highest level in that area is 25. But some of the areas are level 3, some of the areas are level 4, 5, 6, etc. If you're higher than that level, you get reduced down to that level. Not that the level scales up to you. What this does is that this game sees your level. Because you're higher level than it, it will give you better stats, right? Corresponding to whatever stats that you have, as well as you actually having the higher level abilities. And so by doing this, you actually become a lot stronger, and you end up being, a pretty decent powerhouse, but not so overpowered that you can power level, but you still can play with your friends. So you're getting stronger when you enter these lower level zones. However, you're not so strong that you can power level necessarily, although you probably could to some degree, but it wouldn't be like D3 where you enter and you're level 70, or your Paragon 1000, you boost level 1 to 70 in like 4 minutes. It wouldn't be like that. But by scaling people down, you can have them play together while also making them feel stronger and have the lower level contribute. I think that's the way to solve it. I don't think that scaling the monsters up is necessarily a good thing all the time, but I do think it's better than the alternative of no dynamic leveling scaling, which I think is a horrible idea, especially for a casual game such as this one. So that's kind of my final thoughts. I know I didn't dive into the gameplay that much and the art style. I'll say that here at the end. I mean, all your abilities feel incredibly smooth. The graphics are the absolute best ARPG I've ever seen. I mean, it is just so beautiful. And a lot of things are just so amazing to look at, as well as experience, especially when in terms of abilities, because of how responsive the game feels and how fun the gameplay loop generally feels as well. As for my overall thoughts, what I would rate this game at the end of this review, I would give my experience and Diablo 4 at the current moment an 8 out of 10 for the respective audience. Keep in mind, when I think of respective audience, I'm thinking of the casual ARPG enjoyer that can jump in the game, maybe not have a ton of time to play, but just wants to blast some monsters and enjoy the game. I think this is going to be an amazing game for you. The real critiques that a lot of people have tend to only apply for the more hardcore players, which, to be fair, I am also included in that category. However, even though I play a lot, I tend to steer on the side of more casual systems because it lends itself to a more fun experience, as well as a more fun community and expansive community. Do I want more complicated systems? Probably, for myself, but I don't think it matters too much for me as long as the natural gameplay loop is good and there's not like some game-breaking dumb things in the game, like the way you participate in events. That to me is just not something that should be in the game, or how you cannot participate in fights because the bosses just ram through you, drop pools or whatever, and you can't fight them as a melee class. So that's kind of going to be my in-depth review. As for my favorite class, as well as what I might be playing on launch, there's two classes that I played that I really enjoyed. One, the Rogue, which is actually my least played class in the beta, because I played a lot of it previously in other betas. The second most played was actually Druid, or the most played was actually Druid. So I played a ton of Druid. Why? Because I wanted to get a build that works, because I thought that the class, or a lot of people thought the class was bad. And to be fair, it didn't take that long to get the Druid up and running. I was trying a lot of different builds, and honestly, a lot of them were decent, but I only showcased my best one. So honestly, Rogue was my favorite class. The class that I'll be playing on launch, potentially a Rogue, potentially a Sorcerer. Those two are probably going to be the highest ones for me in terms of how fun they were. I really enjoyed the mobility aspect of the Rogue, and I think that's a really advantageous thing that not any other class can even come close to how fast they're moving through the map, and I really enjoy that. So that's going to wrap it up. If you guys want to check out my full review on the classes, be sure to sub, because I'm going to be doing a full breakdown of each of the class, giving them ratings in their damage, their mobility, their survivability, and their versatility. And if you want to see those rankings as well as my full opinion, be sure to sub, because that will be coming out potentially in the next couple of days. If you enjoyed, like the video, guys. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below, especially if you played the beta yourself, or even if you're someone looking into all the experiences that we're having in the beta. Let me know what you have to say as well. Are you interested? Were you interested in the content? Were you interested in buying the game now? Or potentially maybe you're not interested and you wanted to mention that and give me the reason why. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.